Also the story here at the Hall of Fame, Milton Richman, the great writer from United Press International, is about ready to receive his Writers Award. Let's go to the podium, and the great writer from United Press International, Milton Richman, who's receiving one of the Spink Awards of this year, along with Joe Reichler. Here's Milt.
Unaccustomed as I am to being up here, more often I'm in the habit of being seated where you are, and I must admit that I'm a lot more comfortable out in front there than I am up here. But I must also be candid and say that I wouldn't trade this particular moment for anything else in the world. To be standing here among some of the dearest friends I've ever had and some of the greatest sources of inspiration anybody ever had for his work is a pleasure that's so indescribable I couldn't possibly find words. I do want to say one or two things before I enunciate my thanks to all those who made it possible for me to be here today. Number one is that I did not come prepared with any formal speech, and for that I fault myself. And having a bit of difficulty with it last night, I went over to a very dear and longtime friend of mine, Ralph Kiner, and I petitioned him asking what suggestions he might have for some kind of subject matter. And he said, "Why don't you tell him you owe it all to your brother, Artie?" Not quite, but I owe him an enormous debt. He's been a tremendous source of pleasure and cooperation with me. A lot of people think he gives me information for me to write my stories. I'd starve to death if I ever had to depend on my brother. But he's been a wonderful brother anyway. And if I ever had to have one brother, I don't think I could pick out any one greater one to have than him. I would also like to say that, of course, my dear father and mother, who are not here, they've been instrumental in making it possible for me to be here this afternoon. And if I had to single out some other folks who have made it possible, also, I would never forgive myself if I glossed over and overlooked my dearly beloved Carmela, who has helped me for more years than she ever cares for me to mention. She's a wonderful human being. Along with that, I wanted to touch very briefly on my baseball career. People sometimes talk about having a cup of coffee. Mine was more like instant postum. Wherever I was, I managed very successfully and very rapidly to earn my unconditional release. They said that I could run a little bit, feel a little bit, but as one of my managers said, Frank Osiak, hitting pathetic. And try as I could never improve upon it. I think I was overmatched from the first time I ever went into the batter's box. But before I do leave, I do want to extend my thanks to all the number of friends, people from the place I live in Greenwich Village, who came up and honored me with their presence. I want to also thank a person like Leo Peterson, no longer here, my first employer, and the United Press International for making it possible for me to ever have the good fortune to work in and use as an occupation an avocation that I love. But most of all, I do want to express my gratitude to these people alongside me, the ball players, the Hall of Famers, and so many others who haven't made the Hall of Fame. I look out there and I see someone like Bill White. He'll never know how much great pleasure he afforded me just by watching him play. And there's so many others like them. But I am so thrilled, I am so overwhelmed that I think the last possible words I could possibly say is, I never would have been up here if it wasn't for someone like Joe Reichler, who is a co-winner of the J.G. Taylor Spink Award, of which I am so honored to receive. If he didn't push me to the limit, and he says that I ran him ragged, he's allowed 2 fibs, and he has just used up his entire quota right there. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.